Episode 77. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to this year-end episode of Dogman Encounters Radio with me, your host, Vic Cundiff. For tonight's show, I put together, in my opinion, what are the creepiest encounters that aired in 2015 on the show. The first encounter you'll hear on tonight's show was from episode 66. That eyewitness chose to be anonymous.
My uncles used to tell me horror stories about how the Dogman liked to make people disappear. Said, sometimes you'll find vehicles abandoned on the side of the road, or sometimes you'll find people with their houses open, the doors open. And they say that a Dogman would come up and pretty much check the door to see if it was unlocked at night. If it's unlocked, they would just go straight on in there. Snoop around if somebody was in there, if they didn't have dogs or something in there to alert them to it, or, something like that. And Dogman would snatch them. Or Dogman would check a window to see if somebody was locking their window, or see if it was open, or see if it was just screened. They would try to get their attention for one reason or another. Terrify them, or just go ahead and snatch them right through the window. Usually if they were asleep, my uncle said the Dogman would grab them by their leg and just pull them straight on out. One particular scary bit my uncles used to tell me is that sometimes a Dogman would take and try to get somebody's attention to come outside. And if you got a large porch or something like that, they'd be standing up on top of the porch, waiting for you to come out. As soon as you come out, they'd snatch you up by the head. And anybody who come along later would find somebody missing, everything in their house just like they had left it, door wide open, but the person's just gone. Another thing they told me is that sometimes they would try to run across a road or something like that and scare somebody into either pulling off or skidding off into a ditch or something like that. And then they'd either sit there and wait for a person to get out or come right on up and pull the door open and get them. A bit spooky to be relaying some of those stories around a campfire at night, but that's what they like to do sometimes. My uncles like to give you a little scare every once in a while, telling about horror stories. I was 12 years old at the time. I don't remember exactly where it was. I only remember it was in the southeast Tennessee region. The area was full of low-lying hills, pastures, and fields, separated by woods, forest with a few creeks, and a bunch of cow pastures had ponds and stuff in them. And there was a ranch-style farmhouse up there. My three eldest uncles took me on up there with their dogs. They had three big old dogs. They were mixed bred between a coonhound and a mastiff. And my youngest of my elder uncles was the one that tended to be in charge of breeding the dogs. Well, three big old male dogs they'd keep up there with us. And we went inside this ranch house. And it looked like people were still living in the ranch house. They had just kind of vacated the area. I don't know if they did that because they had a deal with my uncles to come in there and try to clear something out that had been messing with their cattle or what, but we went in there and they were gone, and my uncles unloaded the truck and took the dogs, and they took a tiller and a bunch of huge traps that looked to me like bear traps, and some shovels and some of those spiral stake spikes that you twist into the ground for dogs. When this all started, I kind of thought they were just going to stake the dogs out. They didn't do it, though. They just brought the dogs right on inside the house. And every time when they'd go outside, they'd take the dogs with them. And they'd kind of spread the dogs out. Two of them would go off and hold the dogs, and one of them would be working. And they'd plow the ground up underneath the windows. And a pretty huge arc going out around those windows. All the ground underneath the windows. And then when they got them plowed up, they commenced the digging. They kind of scraped off the ground that they had plowed, and then they would dig into the solid ground underneath that about 2.5 feet. Then they'd twist these twist spikes in that ground. And kind of hard to twist them in there. I remember them having to use sticks to stick into that loop on top of the spike and twist it to get a better grip. It was kind of hard clay. They attached a length of logging chain onto the spike. And they attached that to that bear trap thing, and then they'd fill it back in, and they'd set the bear trap down on top of the ground, right about the level of where it's hard. And then they'd put that plowed earth back up on top of it, nice and gentle, so you can't see it, and the whole thing looked normal. And they'd plant some sort of little bush or something around. I think it was just some sort of ornamental thing that they picked up to make it look like they had just plowed it up and turned it into like a little manicured thing to plant something in next to the house. Anyway, between those plants, they would always stick a bear trap. And they'd put a bear trap right there, directly underneath the window. And they'd do the same thing to all those bear traps. They would be attached to spikes that are twisted down into that hard clay, into that hard ground, and buried just underneath the ground to where you can't see them. They never did stake the dogs out. Every time the dogs would start acting up, they'd quit work, and they'd bring the dogs inside, and they'd come inside too. And every time they did that, they'd always stick me in the bathroom. This house had a bathroom towards the middle of it, and they had the window blocked off. The tiny little window that's up towards the top of the wall in the bathroom. They kept it blocked off with a trash bag and duct tape. Make sure nothing could see in. Now, every time the dogs would stop growling or something at the wall, then they'd go back outside with the dogs, look around the house, make sure the dogs didn't act up. If the dogs acted up again, they'd bring them inside. If the dogs didn't act up, they would go ahead and continue working until they got all the windows done up the way they wanted them. And they'd come inside with the dogs, and they'd only go outside with the dogs, let the dogs use the bathroom, and then it's right back inside the house. Well, one night, or rather I should say early morning, because I remember it was just starting to get light over towards the horizon. We heard the awfulest screaming and yelling on the side of the house right about where a window was. And something thrashing up against the house, and the dogs were... Before this, the dogs had already started, growling and like they was following the wall. But the dogs didn't bark. They didn't bark unless they got something up a damn tree. But, we heard that awful screaming and squalling sound outside. It sounded like whatever was real high-pitched, like shattered glass high-pitched. I always think back to it and think it's a wonder that the windows never did bust out. But they didn't take the dogs out with them this time. This time they went outside with pump shotguns. Several loads, reloads. And I heard them just a-blasting away. Sound like they were going 2 shotguns at a time. Then another one would take over while they reloaded. And they just kept blasting away. To me, it felt like this went on for like 10 minutes. And then it stopped. Screaming stopped like halfway through. But after they stopped shooting, they brought me on out there, and it was getting a bit more light. And they made sure to show me what they had killed out there. It was one of these dogmen. They always seemed to believe that to make something feel more real so you weren't too afraid of it, you had to see it dead. That's what they did. They showed it to me, and they let me go up there and touch it and examine it. Let me pull its lips back and get a real good close look at its teeth and its claws. I like to say what's on its hands, but they look kind of like somebody had taken a dog or a wolf's paw and blowed it up to huge proportions and then stretched all the toes out to become fingers. And it actually had 5 fingers, which is something you wouldn't expect from something that was blowed up from a dog's paw. But it had the rough, what looked like chapped skin. The broken type pattern that you see on the pads of a dog. You ever take your dog's foot up and look at it, it doesn't really have fingerprints. It's got a kind of a broken pattern to the skin. Its fingers and the pads of its hands kind of looked like that. And it had these long fingernails that were real thick and strong, like and pointed like claws. And they were like, God, they must have been like an inch or so long, maybe longer, coming out of the fingers. And they were retractable. I remember that. I remember going up there and looking at them and thinking they were like a cat's. They were retractable. They kind of moved a little bit, not all the way, but a little bit inside and outside of the finger, the way a cat's does. When I saw this, I kind of asked my uncles if that thing was some sort of cat. They told me, nope. Look at the head, boy. Does that look like a cat's head to you? Got up there and did a real close look at the head, and it looked like a giant freaking dog. Just looked like somebody had taken a huge dog's head, stuck it there. They didn't shoot the head. They seemed to be concentrating on the body and the legs and the big parts of the arms. And they pretty much made this thing's body look like hamburger. There were a few dimes scattered about. This thing's teeth, I got a real good close look at its teeth. I felt of its mouth, its lips. Its lips were like a dog's. They kind of, a dog's got these lips that are, able to go up and down a little bit higher than a human's. They were like that. But its teeth weren't like a dog's. It had canine's teeth the way a dog did, but the teeth weren't like a dog. The dog's teeth kind of are rounded. They're softer edged. They're not as sharp. Dog's teeth don't really have real hard, sharp points on them. But these things did. Both the uppers and the lowers had sharp points. It looked kind of like they were self-sharpening against themselves or something. The ears had little spikes or tufts of fur coming out of the top of them, and they were pointed. But they weren't pointed exactly the way a German Shepherd's were. They were kind of curved a little bit inward from the top. And the eyes were an amber colored. It looked kind of like somebody had shined a light through a glass of beer. The way the beer kind of lights up a little bit, and it's got that kind of amber color to it. The claws on the feet looked just like really huge dog paws. But the claws didn't seem to be retractable on the feet. And I don't know if it's just because of death or what, but two of the toes seemed to be curled upward. I don't know if anybody's like this, but they ever try to stretch out their toes when they got bare feet, how two of the toes sometimes seem to curl upwards a little bit better than the other three. That's the way this thing's feet did. My uncles made sure I got a real good close look at this thing. Felt of it. When I finished examining it, they brought out machetes, and they went to hacking it apart. Cut its arms, its legs, its head, and chopped its body up. They kind of strolled the body out through the woods, and across the fields, things like that, and they left them there. When I asked them about that, they said they needed to do that to make sure other ones didn't come into the area. After that, we left. I never really went back to that spot, or I'm not even sure I'd be able to find that house again. Like I said, I was 12 years old, and I didn't know exactly where it was. I wasn't keeping track of road signs or anything like that. All I knew, it was in somewhere in southeast Tennessee.
Episode 67, Donnie Sonner.
So I got in contact with my friends, and I said, are you guys up for this weekend? I'm going fishing. They were all for it. Off we went. We get at the fishing hole. It's kind of dark. When we fish, we really concentrate on being as stealthy as we can. Not that we're trying to sneak up on anybody. This river winds and kind of reminds you of being in Vietnam that the foliage was that thick. This was at the middle of July or so. So, it was summertime, the plants were growing, and this area was very low. If you went down the road a little further, it was all swampy. It gives you an idea of the ground and the soil. I don't think I've ever been there where the soil's been dry. Even up on land, the soil's kind of black. But anyway, we get in there, and as you start to fish up the river a little ways, you end up in an area where the river has cut through the land over years and years. You have embankments on each side of you, and they're about 6 feet vertical, and they're mud. So there's really nowhere to go when you're in that river other than walking the river. My one friend and I noticed at the top of the land, looking down on us, was an animal that we don't have in Maryland. It was a coyote. And he was interested in us. Mostly coyotes, from what I understand, if they get a whiff of a human, they're gone. This thing was kind of interested in us. We thought, that was strange. And went down a little further, and we saw 2 coyotes. And we could hear them yipping, so we knew there was more than 2. However, we only seen 2. We didn't feel like we were in any danger or anything like that. We continued to fish with no real problems. We were catching fish and having a good time. We fished up to where we normally fish. It's called the Patuxent River, but there's many, many parts. You got the Little Patuxent, the Patuxent River, the Upper Patuxent. The part we fished in was just little small parts of the Patuxent River. We fished that whole day with, no other problems. One of the men that I fish with, he's deaf. I can sign language a little bit, but, I don't know a lot. The other guy, he's a police officer, and, he's also got a little bit of outdoor experience. I don't think he's got the experience that I have, but, he's been hunting and fishing periodically. But that kind of rattled us both, and I remember talking about that all the way home because, I would drop these guys off at their house, and we had talked about that. Did we really see coyotes? I know what a coyote looks like. I've seen them, out west. I know the way the dog's built. I know the sound of a coyote, and that's what we saw, coyotes. Like I say, they were taking a great interest in us. At no time did they ever try to jump in the river or anything like that. They were curious nonetheless. So we left that day. We had made plans. At that time, I was working every other Saturday. You can't hunt and fish all the time. You got to spend time with the family. September of 2001, we decided we were going fishing. And I remember the excitement of it. We went to the store and bought a few new lures, and, that stuff doesn't excite some people, but when you're a fisherman, to buy a couple new lures and maybe a fishing pole or whatever, that's exciting to me. That's just part of my inventory. I guess we got there about 5:45 in the morning. Still wasn't daylight. So all we had when we go in the water is a pair of shorts, and we used to always wear cleats because, it can be slippery, and the cleats just give you a type of security where you don't slide around so much, and, they dig into the sand at the bottom of the river just like they would dig into the dirt when you were playing softball. We got about maybe 1/8 of a mile, 3/16 of a mile up in the river. You got to remember, this river, just doesn't flow straight. It's really windy. And when the water gets high, it erodes places on the sides that when the water goes back down, you're left with like a little baby beach. My friend looked down, there was this track in the sand, and it was a canine track. We all pretty much agreed on that. But the weird part, Vic, was this thing had 5 toes. Not like a dog where it would have 4 toes and then the back pads. This thing had 4 distinct toes, and you could see in the sand, I'm not going to call them fingernails, I'm going to call them claws. They were very, very predominant claws. But at that particular point, we only saw one. And, like, that's kind of weird. Well, the big guy, the deaf man, he had looked around and he had found another track right at the edge of the foliage where the undergrowth stopped growing, and that became the river. Found another track right at the very edge. You can tell left from right when you're looking at these. I don't know if whatever this was on a dead run or was walking, jogging, what it was doing, but it was 6 feet from that track to the track in the sand. And then it had the obstacle of crossing a small part of the creek, which was about 10 feet wide at that point. We looked around a little more, and we saw the other track where it had hit on the side close to the water. And you could tell these tracks, especially the last track in the sand, was a little deeper, like something had pushed off. And same with the other, it was deeper than probably what it should have been. And that to me adds up as where, it had landed. I don't think it ever touched the water. That was really strange to us, but it didn't really spook us. We said, that's a big animal, because my friend got a Great Dane, and she has some big feet. But when she walks, she leaves her footprints, but she doesn't really leave any toenail prints. Not like this. We kind of discussed it, and I remember the big guy, Bones, with him not being able to speak, he kind of just took his hand and, waved it off like, whatever. He wanted to fish. So we continue up, and like I say, we are almost combat stealthy. The only thing you can hear when we're fishing is when we throw that lure, and the lure hits the water, and it makes that kaboom sound. We fished way up. Way up. We were half a mile, 3/4 of a mile up into the creek. And I know these measurements because this creek crosses under certain roads, and I know how far it is. But if you add in all the curves, it's not just a straight line. It's probably further than a half a mile. And at this point, we're in part of the creek where the embankment is vertical. I don't think you could get out if you tried. You'd have to have a piece of rope tied to a tree, maybe, and you might get up the river embankments, because the mud was that kind of red clay that they have down in Georgia, but it was slippery as hell. It was just, real smooth. So we never really messed with it. We're fishing and catching fish here and there, and, there's no talking, and other than the click of a lighter where I was the only one that smoked, the click of a lighter would be the only real noise we would make. And, we would see deer and beavers, we would see raccoons, herrings, all kind of animals. And sometimes we would just stop fishing and watch the animals. Especially, I used to love to watch raccoons, how they manipulate their front hands. They can flip over a rock, catch a crayfish, or a crawdad, whatever you want to call it, and bring it up to their mouth and eat it. And they eat it so fast, they eat it, discard of what's left of it, and start looking for more. To me, being an outdoorsman, that's not something that's just neat to watch. It's something that you can appreciate. If you love the outdoors like I do, you appreciate what comes with it, if you understand what I'm saying, Vic. We went up the creek a little further, and you get to a part of this creek where a enormous oak tree had fallen for whatever reason. The wood didn't break, the roots and all blew over. And I remember the roots being feet above my head. That left a hole, a perfect fishing hole. And, we were excited to get to that point. I think we had made a few casts. If you can picture 3 men in a river, one to the left, one to the middle, and one to the right. My friend Bones, he kind of froze in his tracks like he was seeing something that he didn't know what it was. Both of us looked over and looked to where he was looking, and I'll be honest with you, whatever it was busy, because all we could see was the back. At that particular point in the river, a small branch, a little tiny creek, whatever you want to call it, flowed into the main river. That was one of the only points to where if you wanted to walk out of there, you could walk out that way and get up on the land and walk out. And I'm looking at this thing, your mind's going a million miles an hour. Can't be a bear, because we don't have no bears at this part in central Maryland. I've heard of bears wandering down close, but not this close. But we were on the line of Fort Meade and that wildlife center, so who knows what it could have been. But that all ended when this thing turned and looked at us. I can't speak for the other men, but I can say to myself, I was like, this is not a bear. And I did leave something out, I'm sorry. As we were coming up on this spot, we had heard a commotion in the water. We didn't know if it was beavers. Beavers will flap its tail when they see or hear something coming to warn the others. But it wasn't a terrible commotion, just a commotion. And with us walking against the water, and this water was clear enough you could see the bottom. I don't care if you were in 6 feet of it, you could still see the bottom. Very clear water. And we noticed that there was mud in the water. When a deer's in trouble, it'll make that bleating sound. I call it bleating. I don't know, across the country, I'm sure it's used in different words, but in human terms, it's a scream. When we made it to that area, I had saw the rear end of a deer right at the edge of the creek. And this animal was on the deer. When it noticed us, it turned its head and looked at us. At that point, it had made just a few moves to where I could see more of this creature. The middleman, he was a police officer, and the guy we call Bones, everyone, I guess, was trying to do the same thing I was doing, trying to wrap their head around what we were seeing. First, I had thought bear. I think massive dog may have crossed my mind at one time. But anything that can pull a white-tailed deer down like that and hold it down has got to be very strong. Anybody out there that knows white-tailed deer, they can be very resilient, especially when they're fighting for their life. Our deer here in Maryland, we don't have huge deer. They run 120 to 150 pounds. That's big enough. And I challenge anyone to go out and jump on a deer and try to wrestle it to the ground. I would put my paycheck on it that you're going to walk away bruised, battered, and probably with some stitches. As this thing looked at us, I could see off the right side that it was holding this deer down in the water. I don't think it was trying to bite the back of the neck per se, like a cougar or a bear or any major predatory animal. This thing was holding the animal down with brute force, with one hand. And when he saw us, he immediately spun around, and the word I'm going to use is ballerina. This thing turned around, holding the animal down with one hand, in an instant, put its foot where its hand was to continue holding the animal down, which at this point I think it was pretty much expired. It had died. And there was a little bit of blood in the water, but not a lot of blood that would indicate that there was a lot of physical trauma to this deer. But there had been some trauma somewhere. I didn't see it. So when this thing turned around and looked at us, I can speak for the other men. We all froze. And we froze for a good 3 or 4 seconds. We were nothing but statues in the water. When your brain is looking at something like that, your brain's working at warp speed trying to figure out what it is. Because from what I understand with a lot of scientific studies, when you look at something and you've never seen it and you don't understand what it is, your brain is trying to compare it to something that you already know. Well, this thing was something that I didn't know, something that wasn't supposed to exist. In my time in the woods, I had never seen anything like this. I had never heard about anything like this. You know, I've heard about the boogers. While down south, right on the border with Georgia, I had a booger sighting. It was at a long ways, but, you know, they were accepted. Even my father told me at a young age in the woods when we started hunting, keep your wits about you. Don't just look around you, you know, look up. My father never let on, but I'm convinced that he knew something, and maybe he was planning on sharing it with me when I was a little older. I don't know, because he's passed on now. You know, I don't know what he was going to tell me. But my father was a very good hunter, taught me everything he knew. He was a very good marksman, and he passed all that down to me at a very, very, very young age. So here I am, 30 years later. I'm looking at something that, Vic, it's not supposed to exist other than in movies. When this thing turned around, we do the same thing with animals, usually, as we do with people. We look at the head or the face first to try to recognize what it is. And if you could cross a baboon, a hyena, and a wolf together, you would almost sum up what the face looked like. It had a mane, not like a lion's mane, but had real thick fur around the head and neck. And the shocking part was this thing was on 2 feet. It looked comfortable down on all fours while I was dispatching of this deer, but it looked just as comfortable, if not more comfortable, when it got up on 2 feet. I had never heard the term Dogman up until maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago. And, you know, this happened in 2001. So I didn't know what I was looking at. All I know what I was looking at was it wasn't supposed to exist. The massiveness of this animal, the body structure. It didn't really have paws. I'm going to call them hands. Not like a man's hand. Much larger, much longer. Almost if you could take a wolf's paw and stretch it out. Stretch the middle part out between the front toe pads and the rear pads. Stretch that part out and then stretch the fingers out. I want to make it very clear, this was the middle of the day. This is not something that I caught in the corner of my eye. In the middle of the day, and we're kind of having, at this point, a Mexican standoff. And it wasn't that we were trying to be brave and face this animal, is we were frozen in fear, shock, and I don't think either of us knew what to do. But while this thing was standing there, Bones, he kept looking over his shoulder to the embankment behind us. My other friend and I kind of caught on, and we started never wanting to take our eye off of this Dogman, but we wanted to see what was behind us. And we never did see it. We heard it. That's when the fear almost set in tenfold, that we knew that this guy wasn't alone. I mean, to catch a deer in the middle of the woods, you know, a deer can change angles. It could be going one way and make a left turn, make a right turn. And anything that catches a deer in the middle of the woods, and I know how fast a deer can run, has got to have speed, strength, and agility that we just don't understand. Maybe one of the superheroes that, you know, the kids watch might have a chance. But this was a real creature. We had brought some pistols with us, only for coyotes, because, you know, coyotes can be a little vicious. I know quite a bit about firearms. Anything from the smallest little .22 up into the .458 lot elephant guns or the .570 nitros and everything in between. I knew what we had. We would have been better off picking a rock up and throwing it. So we never did shoot. After we could move a little bit and kind of come back to reality, this thing made a bluff charge. With the first millisecond, I didn't know that it was a bluff charge. And everything ran through my mind at that point. Because I knew this thing was built from the ground up, if it chose to, be a killing machine. The speed in which it made those 3 or 4 steps was the speed of I want you to picture a cat that is swiping its paw at something really fast. Like maybe it's trying to, if a dog comes up to it, it might strike the dog in the face with the paw. You don't realize the paw has hit you until it's hit you. You know, you didn't even see it coming. But it stopped. This thing actually looked at all 3 of us like it was sizing us up. It wasn't just an animal standing there. It had sized us up. You could definitely see at that point that it would make a real quick look across the river. That just added to the fear. Standing in water, I'm not sure, but I really do. I think I wet myself. Because this is going against the grain of everything that I was taught, everything that I had learned, and a creature that don't exist. But I'm here to tell you they exist. They're real. So the only real option we had in order to get behind us was those vertical banks in the water. But the only way to really get up on the land would be to walk up, brush the Dogman aside, step over what he just killed, and go up there. Well, I got news for you folks. That's not happening. You know, not me. But at the end of its little bluff charge, it growled at us. No barking or anything like that, but it growled at us. We were probably, at the most, when we stopped, 25 feet. And this thing took a 10-foot bluff charge. Now we're even closer. And when it growled at us, it opened its mouth a little bit. I could see the canines, or the teeth, whatever you want to call them. This growl was so deep. The lung capacity of this animal has to be incredible in order to make that sound and hold that sound. It reverberated through every bone in your body. You really do. You think, if my family finds me, it's going to look like I've been chopped up and, ready to put into a mayonnaise jar. That's how well built these animals are. The legs of this animal, just to give you a little perspective, they were muscularly enormous. Now I wear a 32, 33 waist pants. Each of its thighs were about as big as my waist, if that gives you any idea of the lower part. And then the upper part, you could see dog features, but it was more manly. This thing actually had a chest. It had biceps like a man. I'm not going to say the hands were like a man, because a man's hand is not that frightening to look at. This thing was kind of black in color with some gray, but the fingernails were coal black and a good inch long. Maybe an inch and an eighth, I don't know. And they were curved, but they weren't curved like a hawk or something like that. But they were curved. They were meant for grabbing something and holding on to it, kind of like a cat when it extends its claws. It can play with a mouse and just hook it with one of its claws. But these claws look like they could rip if they wanted to as well. They weren't like fingernails. They were flat. They were roundish, and they came down to that point. I can give you these descriptions because I was within spitting distance of this thing. It did have a tail, but by now we're trying to back out. We're walking backwards. Don't ask me why, but we still had the guns in our hand. I think had we fired a shot at that thing, it would have been our own demise. Initially, we had only brought the little handguns just in case the coyotes got a little crazy. Because there's times when we used to fish little rivers that we would carry the grating of them little hibachi grills, and I would put it in my backpack, and we would stop on the clear spot on the edge of the river, and, we would eat what we caught that morning. And I think back on that now, how stupid that was. But then again, for some reason, being, within a half mile of the road, and you're not far from civilization at all, it kind of takes the fear factor away. I'm sure it's nothing like being out in the Midwest, in the middle of nowhere, and worrying about a grizzly bear. I would have rather faced 2 grizzly bears at this point, because the evilness that comes with this thing, part of me wants to say that this creature is from somewhere else, that it's not here. Somehow it just made it here. But I'm slowly learning. Vic educated me a lot on a lot of things I didn't know. These things are indigenous to our land. I'm not talking right here in the middle of the country. I'm talking if they want to, right into suburban USA. Right in, your backyard. You never know if you have dogs outside that are going crazy, or if you have a dog that wants to crawl under the bed for no reason. There just might be a reason for that. Like I said earlier, I had a pit bull that I don't think he was afraid of anything. Before that day, he wouldn't get out of the truck. That really struck me as odd. And when you look back on these events, hindsight's always 20/20. Maybe seeing the tracks in the sand were enough to say, hey, we need to get out of here. This is something we don't know what it is. I had the average size hand. This print was bigger than my hand. So as we're backing out, slowly but surely, we could hear on the opposite bank something paralleling us that was not trying to be stealthy. It wasn't trying to hide from us. It did hide from us to the point where we really didn't see it. But you got to remember, we're down in the river. We would have to look up to see it. with the banks of the river being about 6 feet of mud, it could have been 6 feet off the side and we couldn't have been able to see it. But regardless, it was paralleling us to the truck. Once we had got a quarter of a mile away, that's when we started beating feet as best we could. I don't know if this hurts the program or not, but I forgot to say about it did pick the deer up as we were backing out. This is something that didn't have to take its teeth and drag the animal like any other predator that I know of. This is something that it looked like a mature deer, picked it up and walked away with it. And the whole time in the background, you could hear the yipping of the coyotes, almost like they were in some kind of ecstasy. I don't know. As we were backing out, we crossed that sandbar that we had seen with the track. But this time, not only did we see the track that we had seen where it or another one had crossed right there as well, going the other way. So in reality, as we were fishing, these things were all around us. I'm sure now they watched us get out of the truck. I'm sure of it. But once we got where we thought we could turn around, and you can't run in thigh-deep water, but you can try to make your best effort. We got in the truck, and neither one of us had a fishing pole to bring back. We had dropped them. Not that I cared, but we dropped our fishing poles. When we got up to where the fence is, it's a real effort to get through. You almost gotta go underwater with your head and come back up. But we all got through, and the embankment where the bridge crossed to go up to the truck, it's probably 50 feet, I would say. Slimy, dirty, muddy. Well, I can guarantee you, Vic, we set the record in the time that it would take a man to get from the bottom of the top, to the truck. And, this was a brand new 2001 Toyota, which, people with their vehicles, they try to take care of them, and, I didn't care. I got in there wet, muddy, started the truck, took the guys home, and went home. And didn't say nothing to anybody. I've never said anything to anybody. This is the first that I've spoken to this. It's helped me a lot to talk about it. When I initially talked to Vic, I couldn't get my words out. And I'm sure he can attest to this, I was truly rattled. Because I was talking about something that I had tried to bury for 14 years. I'm not discounting anyone's experience with this, because it is truly a terrifying ordeal. And there's no words to describe the absolute terror of seeing something like this. Point in case, if a serial killer tried to kill you or whatever, your mind knows that that's a man and you go into your fight or flight mode. But when you see something like this, it adds a whole different type of fear to it. I try to explain it the best I can. Anybody that's never seen one, you are in my prayers that you never do. The good thing is we all did get out of there safely. We were scared, partially in shock, I guess, but we did get out. We made it.
Next up, we've got Josh Turner with 5 encounters from episodes 55 and 59.
It was on Halloween night of 1990. I was 15 years old. I was with my friend, Dave. We had gone egging. I live in a small town, and that's what we did. So we were out egging cars and, and acting like hooligans, I guess. My mother had given me a curfew to be home by 11 o'clock. It was already almost midnight, and so I called my mother from my friend's house to tell her, I'm on my way home and try to get her to give me a ride. Of course, she was like, no, you get home now. And so I knew I was in trouble, probably going to be grounded. But I figured, you know what, I had a fun night. It was worth it. So I got ready to start walking. Me and my friend went down to the Circle K that was right there on the corner, like right around the corner from his house. When we were leaving the Circle K, he decided he was going to walk me to a halfway point to where my friend lived. My friend him and his brother would work on bicycles, and he always had like 2 or 3 of them outside, and he always let us, like I could borrow one, and I was going to ride the bike the rest of the way because it was probably about 3 or 4 miles, or I guess about 2 or 3 miles actually to my house. And so we're walking and talking, and we get up to the corner, and this house on the next block over, at the end of that block, there was a house. The guy that lived there was a young couple. They had 2 German Shepherds in the backyard, and they were always barking and any noise or whatever. I thought I saw one loose sitting in the ditch in front of their house. I strained my eyes, and I thought, is that a dog? The guy that I was with, he stopped me. I just kept walking, kind of straining my eyes, and he kind of grabbed me by my shirt, and he was like, that's not one of their dogs. I don't know what that is. From a distance, from a block and a half, I guess it would be probably a block and a half away, it just kind of looked like a dog. Once we got to the end of that first block, then it was just a block up. That's when it came into focus, like what it was. It wasn't a dog, and it wasn't the neighbor's dog. I realized this thing was really large. Just to be sure, I tried to call it like, come here, whatever, made a noise. This thing turned its head and faced us. That's when I realized this is not a dog. This isn't a man. I don't know what this is. And, being that it was Halloween, people would say, well, maybe it was a guy in a costume. Well, like I said, it was midnight. Why would this person be sitting in a ditch in a small town where there's nobody else around? I just thought, this is odd. This thing is just sitting there. If it was a person, it's sitting in a ditch. And so as we walked a little bit closer, this thing stood up. It didn't stand up straight. It just kind of hunched over. That's when I realized that this thing had a, for lack of a better term, a wolf's head and what looked like a person's body. Both of us just kind of froze. And the next thing you know, my friend is bolting. He's running. And I'm just standing there like in shock. And I was, I turned, I looked, and my friend had already ran halfway back to his house by the time my legs started moving. So I took off running, and I had one of those fountain drinks in my hand, and I remember just feeling wetness on the bottom of my legs because I guess I had dropped it, and I didn't even remember doing it. When I got to the yard to my friend's house, which was about 3 or 4 houses down from where we were at, this thing, there was a fence, like a chain link fence between the neighbor's house and his house, and there was just an old couple that lived in that house. So obviously they were asleep. It was like midnight. This thing was in their backyard, and it went up to the fence. And when I got to the house, that thing was right there, probably about 30 yards, or 30, 35 yards from me. And I saw it clearly. I mean, it was dark, but I could see it. It was kind of a smoke gray color, and it had really reflective, yellowy looking eyes. I remember the eyes. I don't remember a smell. I didn't smell anything. I don't think I was close enough to smell it, thank God. But I remember it hiking its leg up like it was trying to put its really bizarre-looking foot into, the fence to jump over it. And then it kind of gripped the fence with these weird-looking hands and shook it like it was trying to balance itself or something. And I guess it was just going to leap over it. And I was, standing there petrified and just staring at it. And instead of moving and going inside, which I should have been, I was just staring at it. And I didn't know, I guess because, it's like I was so scared. I was scared to move because I thought it might trigger it jumping, and it looked like it could just reach me. So I stood there kind of shaking, and my legs have never shook like that. You know what I mean? I just remember shaking. And finally, I heard my friend on the porch telling me to come inside, and I just bolted. This thing had to have jumped the fence, because as I got inside, we started looking out the windows, and my friend had already told his mother. And then his mother was in the kitchen, and she screamed, and his little brother was behind her. He came out crying, and everybody was freaking out. And my friend's dad had gone to get his shotgun, and his older brother, was in the back room. He came out, and everybody's looking out the windows. And my friend's mother, it was like she was going to have a heart attack. We still didn't really know what it was or how to describe it. You know what I mean? It was just like, my friend just kept saying, we saw this thing, it's outside. And my friend's mother, being very religious, and like I said, she was Mexican-American, and she was like, it was the devil. The way she described it, she was just like, I just saw the devil. So my friend's dad and his older brother went outside, and I guess the thing was gone. I guess it looked in the window and then just left. They went outside, and they didn't see anything, they didn't find anything. Well, the next day, early in the morning, my friend's brother and my friend and me all went outside, and we saw these weird-looking footprints right outside the window, the kitchen window. It had been a lot of rain, so it was kind of like muddy right there. There was like a patch of ground or whatever that wasn't grass. My friend measured from the ground up to the window where his mother had seen it, and said from that point, from the bottom of the ground, was 7 feet 5 inches, which pretty much it wasn't a man. We know that. That's my encounter. That's what happened, and it was probably 2 days until I could actually sleep again, because that night I just remember like trying to go to sleep, and I just couldn't. It was just like I just waited until daylight, and I don't know. It was pretty traumatic. We had a DJ that worked at our club years ago, back in 2005. I wasn't actually working at the club at that time. I was just always hanging out, going up there and whatever on the weekend. One night after the club closed, I was hanging out, joking around with the bouncers and the bartenders. I did that all the time on the weekend. There was this DJ that worked there. His name was Jacob, and he was from Argentina. His parents were from Buenos Aires. Him and his girlfriend moved out to Marfa. And Marfa is a small town, became like a mecca for these hipsters, these artsy type people. And they were all moving out there. So they rented a place out there, and he got a job out there DJing at a local night spot. And in the house that they lived in, the way he described it was like there was a gravel road, and there was only one way in, one way out. And there was another road in front of their house that just went a couple of houses over to the east, and then that was it. It dead ended. So the only way to get to their place was to go down this gravel road by the cemetery. It was close to Halloween. They had been out there for a couple months. They wanted to get something to eat. There was just one place that stayed open all night there, and that was it. So they went out there to get something to eat, and they got in the car, and they were driving down the road, down this gravel road. He said it was kind of bad in certain spots, so they couldn't go real fast. So they were driving down this road, and they were talking, and they see these two, what they thought were guys, horseplaying. That's the way he described it. They were horseplaying, kind of kicking and swinging at each other in the cemetery. And his girlfriend was like, what is that? Why are these guys out there in the cemetery? He said it was dark, and it was probably like 9 at night, or something like that. They see these two guys kind of messing around with each other or whatever, like they were play fighting, the way he could describe it. And when they drove up and they got even with the cemetery and with these two guys, they realized these two guys were like hairy, and that they didn't look like normal people. But they definitely saw arms and legs, like humanoid arms and legs. He had this high-powered flashlight, and he said he shined it into the cemetery, and one of them put up its arm, and he saw this arm was like hairy, and he saw these claws, and they saw these weird-looking dog-like heads on these things. And then they realized, what is that? One of them put its hand up, or arm, to block the light, and then it just got aggravated and started loping toward them. It got down on all fours and kind of jumped toward them. So they just took off, spinning out in this gravel road. He said, man, like it broke my axle. I went over these bumps and everything. he said that they got to the diner and they were sitting there talking about it. They were trying to rationalize, what was that? What did we just see? He was like, well, maybe it was guys in costume. His girlfriend was like, no way. There's no way those were costumes. I don't know what that was. So they were really freaked out. And he told me that they sat at that diner for like 3 hours because they were scared to go home. So eventually, they said, well, we got to go home. So they did. They didn't see him again that night. Well, about a week later, and they were having a Halloween party at his place. They decided to throw a party and invite all these people because it was, I guess, during the week or something. So his girlfriend, Gina, had her friend Karen over. Karen was cutting some vegetables up for a party tray on this island they had in the kitchen. His girlfriend was in the kitchen looking out the window, I guess, in front of the window, I should say. She was cleaning a tray or something. And one of these things pops up in the window. It just literally came up from the ground up and just there in the window. His girlfriend just screamed and backed up into the island, and Karen, the girl that was cutting the cucumbers or whatever, she cut her hand real bad. So Karen, she cut her hand, and she's like, if you don't take me to the hospital, I'm going to take myself. And they're like, no, don't go outside. Well, she didn't understand what was going on. And it was because they didn't tell them about these things they'd seen in the cemetery. They didn't tell anybody. So Karen just thought they were being weird. Like, I just saw one of those things in the window. She's like, what things? What are you talking about? She didn't see it. It was gone from the window. So Jacob said that he told him, okay, I'll take you to the doctor. Just relax. So they got the keys. He said he was scared that it was going to be out there in the yard, but they went out into the yard, got into the car, and they took her to the doctor, the hospital, whatever. And he said, well, we have guests coming over. They're going to be here in a couple hours. I'm going to go back to the place. He said he was terrified to go back, but he didn't know what else to do. People were going to start showing up, So he goes back to the house. He said he sat in his car for about 20 minutes debating about whether he should even get out because he was scared. So the way that he described where they lived, he said that there was just a gravel road that ended, and then there was just a park behind their house. There was no other houses on that west side of where they lived. So if this thing was on that side of the house, nobody was going to see it but him. So he decides to finally get out and goes inside the house. But once he's inside the house, he starts getting the stuff together and finishing the prepping and all that for their party. He hears a bang at the back door. Something banged against the back door, and he's like, what the hell was that? The back door faces the park. So he walks over there apprehensively. He had a pistol. He grabbed it and went to the door. He thought, well, maybe it's one of my friends. They're knocking on the back door. They're already here early. And he said it was just starting to get dark. So he looked at the people. He didn't see anything, and he thought, man, I hope it's not one of those things. But he goes back into the kitchen to finish doing whatever. Well, then he sounds like two knocks, like, bang, two thuds. At that point, he thought, well, maybe it's guests arriving. Maybe there is somebody out there. So he walks back up to the door, looks at the people, doesn't see anything. The light's on out there. And then he says, well, at that point, I thought, well, it could be somebody. I opened the door, I looked out, didn't see anything. He goes back into the kitchen, and this was really weird. He hears something like moving against the door, kind of like sliding against it. And then the light went out. He could see it through the window in the den that the light outside in the back porch had gone out, which was weird. And then he heard a crash, like a thud against the door. At that point, he knew something was wrong. Something had kicked the door. So he goes out and he opens the door, and he has a gun and he has a flashlight, and he's looking around. He says that he didn't see anything at first, and then he spun back around 180 degrees, and he sees the flashlight. The first thing it hits was the foot of one of these things. He says he sees this paw-looking foot, and he lifts the flashlight up. He also said he saw genitalia. He lifted it right up to the chest and then to the face, and then right then, something reached out and smacked the flashlight out of his hand. He spun back around, and he saw these two shapes kind of like crisscross. So he ran back in the house and closed the door, and then one of them, like, I guess, kicked the door. The way he described it, like somebody would kick it, and it kicked a hole in the lower part of the door. And he said at this point he was scared to death, so he called the police. And the police show up, and he tells them, well, what are you going to tell them, that there's werewolves attacking your house? So he tells them that there's some people messing around out here. I think that they just vandalized my house or whatever. So at this point, the girlfriend shows back up with the girl that had cut her hand, and the girlfriend tells the police when they're just about to leave that what she had seen, she was talking to the police, she told them about the incident in the cemetery, and then she told them that one of these things had popped up in the window. Well, there were two different cops. One was a Hispanic cop, and one was a Native American. It was a Yaqui Indian. And that's what the guy told him. And he said that this Indian cop told him, look, I've been out here for 13 years. He goes, and I know what you're talking about. We've had reports of these things before. He said, how long have you been living out here? And they told him, well, a couple months. And he said, well, if I were you, I would move. And there he did. After that, later on that night, kind of an addendum to it, you know, the guests started arriving, and the first guest that showed up was a friend of his at the club he DJ'd at, and he was wearing a really bad werewolf costume. And he was like, dude, it kind of freaked him out because of what just happened. So I asked him, I said, well, maybe it was the guy in the costume? He goes, no way. He goes, this things I saw were nothing like anything I'd ever seen. It just looked like bigger versions of those things I saw in the cemetery, which means that there were multiple ones. And then he said later on at the end of the night, there were people in the backyard. He was kind of worried. He was like, man, I don't know if I should have people out here, you know, with these things running around. But he was embarrassed to tell people, you know, what am I going to say? I've known these people for a couple months. I'm going to tell them, yeah, there's werewolves out here. He just told them that maybe trick-or-treaters or somebody had vandalized his door. Now, that's how he explained it. The light bulb, this is really creepy. The light didn't get broken out. The bulb had been turned to where the light went out. That means that one of these things had the cognizance to turn the bulb to make it go out. That's creepy, man. He said that he just noticed that the light was out, so he messed with the bulb, and he realized it had been unscrewed. It didn't break it, I guess, so it just, like, turned it. And I thought that was really creepy. That was almost like, you know, letting them know that, look, we can do this. I don't know. That was just the way I gathered it. So he screwed it back in, and at the end of the night, they were cleaning up some of the beer cans in the backyard and stuff. The backyard wasn't fenced in. And he said that they heard this weird howling on the other end of the park. And like 2 or 3 of his friends were back there, and they were like, oh, what is that? He said he knew instantly what it was, but everybody was kind of freaked out by it. They were like, yeah, that gives me the chills. You know, they're like, that's weird. But that was his story. That story really gave me the creeps. To move on to the next one, there was another story that was given to me by a guy that used to work for us. I don't have permission to use his name. He owns a business there in Georgetown, right outside of Austin. So I'm going to call him Paul. There's an old church, an old German church that's been abandoned for a long time outside of Georgetown. If you look at it now, it just looks like it's falling apart. But he went out there when he was a kid. This guy's a little bit younger than me. They said back when he was like 12 or 13, him and his older sister, who was about 5 years older than him, I actually met her once, but I don't remember her name, and his sister's boyfriend. They went out to this old abandoned church to check it out because they were like, you know, it's rumored to be haunted. So they're like, let's go check it out. So he thought, you know, this would be fun. You know, it was toward the end of summer. So him and his sister went out there to go mess around in this church. At this church, it's like the windows, some of them were boarded up. They'd been boarded up for so long that the boards were starting to fall down. They went inside. They just kind of pushed the door in. It wasn't even locked. It was just like it barely was like on the hinges, you know, so they just pushed the door in. They walked in, and they're messing around. He's like looking at all this stuff. He said one of the things that struck him was that everything was still in place. They had like the fuse. Everything looked like it had been untouched, and then everything had just been left there. His sister and her boyfriend went toward the back of the church. They found all these like crucifixes and things that were in the back, the crosses or whatever that had been untouched. She found one, and she said, I like this one. I'm going to take it. He said then he started having this really creepy feeling, like he really thought that something was there, something was wrong. So he told his sister, he says, I don't think we should be in here. We shouldn't be taking anything out of this place. We should leave. Anyways, she's like, oh, you're just being scared. There's no ghosts here or whatever. And he goes, I don't feel anything about ghosts. You know, he goes, I felt like something tangible was there. And he said that he was looking out the window, and he saw something move by the window, just like a shadow, like it moved really quick. And he was like, whoa, what was that? So he walked up to the window and got a good look, and he looked closely, and he saw in the distance, he saw a well. And this thing, he saw like an arm coming up out of the well, then he saw like what he thought was like a dog, like the head of a dog. And it came up, and it kind of looked around, swiveled its head around. And he thought, and the first reaction he had was that it was a man pushing a dog up out of the well. But the arm-looking thing that he saw, he said it looked like claws. Then he saw another arm come out of it, and it was one complete body. And then it pushed itself up out of the well, and he realized that it was like this dog-headed looking creature. He had seen something go by the window, so he knew there was probably another one. That was probably what it was he saw the first time that got him to go to the window in the first place. So he's screaming at his sister. He's like, we got to go. We got to go. There's something out here. He looks back out the window. He doesn't see the thing anymore. So it had disappeared. And he was like, oh, shoot, this thing is out of the well now. And he says, there's something that just crawled out of the well. And they're like, oh, Paul, you're just being, scaredy cat, whatever. There's nothing out there. Then he looks and he sees another one coming out of the well. And he says, come here and look yourself. So finally they go over there to the window and they're like, what? And they see this thing loping away from the well. He's like, there's at least 2 or 3 of them out here. I saw them. She's like, oh my God. So they freak out. At this point, they decide that they're going to leave. So then they start to walk away, but then they see one looking in the window further down from where they're at, and they stop. And it was pulling down one of the top boards to look in. There was only like one good window that wasn't full of dust that they could clearly make something out. So they looked out the window, and their sister said she saw like a tail, like a wolf's tail, like a dog sitting on its hind legs, and its tail would be sticking out. It was looking in the window, so they got freaked out, and then they saw this shape coming from the other side by one of the windows. So then they all jumped down. The sister's boyfriend was already walking in between the pews. He saw it looking in at the window at him, so he jumped down underneath one of the pews and sat there. At this point, they were all just petrified. This is broad daylight in the afternoon. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go or whatever. They just sat there. There was nothing they could do. And they're like, we can't make it to the car. These things are out there. He said about 20 minutes went by, and then they hear clawed feet walking into the front of this church. They just heard like this kind of barky, yelping noise, and like they were talking back and forth with this barking noise, whatever. They were like, oh my God. So the sister's boyfriend was about 3 pews in of the church, and so he said he saw the feet of this thing. He said it looked like a mixture between a human and dog feet, and that he saw the claws, and the sister and my friend that worked for me, whatever, him and his sister were huddled together underneath one of the windows. The sister's boyfriend said that he clearly saw one of them walk over to the window and look down, like he was trying to look in where they were at. At that point, my friend said that he heard it like rubbing against the window and sniffing. The one that was in the front of the church, it walked back out, like quickly ran back out of the church and went back outside. And then they heard like noise like on his car, like something was messing with his car. So they just sat there. He said they sat there probably 3-4 hours. They just sat there crying, stunned. Him and his sister were crying. So finally, sister's boyfriend, he gets up the balls to get out, to crawl out from under the pew, and he looks and he sees his car, but he doesn't see them anywhere. He says, look, we got to make a run for it in the car. It's getting dark. That was the worst thing. They were just like, we're out here in the dark, and there's no one that knows we're out here. So they get back out to the car. They just make a run for it. They get out to the car. The car door, the passenger car of the car door was open. So these things had opened the car door, and they had, and this was the part I told you about was crazy. They smelled urine. These things had urinated in the car and on the car. One of the seats had like a tear in it. Not a bad tear. It just looked like maybe one of them had positioned himself in the car, you know. And they saw like a weird-looking paw print, like it was wet or something, like it had left like a weird print on the dash. So they get in the car and they smell this awful urine, wet dog smell in the car. They pull out and they drive out. They don't see these things anymore. The only thing he could think of was that when the thing walked into the church, he felt like the thing could not go into the church. Like that's why I turned around and ran back out. It was like the church was a sanctuary or something. And he said his sister was holding this cross and she carried it outside with her. And to this day, he said that she keeps it in her house and it hangs on the wall. She thinks that their prayers saved them. That's the only thing he could think of. He's like, I was praying, please don't let me die, God. I don't want to die like this. Please deliver me from this evil. You know, he said he was praying. And I remember when he worked for me, he was a very devout Christian. He wanted Sundays off to go to church and things like that. And he told me that was why. He felt like God saved him that day, and he owed it to God to be a Christian. So, anyways, the end of this story, they're driving down the road, and apparently something had happened to one of their tires. Maybe one of them had cut it or something. Tire just comes off and it goes flat, whatever. So they had to pull off the side of the road as it's getting dark and get out and put a tire on the car. And while they're doing this, they hear this howling noise coming from down by where the church was. And they were only about 4 miles away from it, he said at that point. He said that he was helping his sister's boyfriend change the tire, and he said he was like, he had tears in his eyes, and his sister's boyfriend kept telling him, be strong, be strong. He said to this day, he thinks that if it wasn't for that guy being brave, he's like, I don't know if me and my sister would have ever moved from that spot. But that's a pretty creepy story. I don't know what I would do if that happened to me, because, what happened to me was bad enough, but that, being out in the middle of nowhere, man, I'll tell you what. One day, I had a guy that worked for me at the club years ago. His name was Bobby. We were talking about what had happened to me. These other guys were kind of laughing about it, and this dude was like, hey, it's not funny, man. I had something like that happen to me, and it was terrifying. I asked him about it. I didn't say anything about it that night because I just wanted to let it go because everybody was laughing and making a joke. Well, I asked him about it one night. I said, hey, you ever get a chance, tell me about what happened to you. He said, well, I can tell you it happened out near Canyon Lake. We were working together, and at the end of the night, me and him get together, and his girlfriend showed up, and she was with him when this happened. And it only happened about a year before he told me this, and when he told me this was back in 2003, I believe. He told me this story, that they were out near Canyon Lake, and they were in a little canoe. They were paddling, and there's this one area where it kind of thins out. It's like a little offshoot of the lake. They decided to go check it out, and in that area, it was kind of narrow, so there weren't any, motorboats. There wasn't any picnickers or people out there. There was always a lot of people out there. There wasn't nothing. And they were out there on this little canoe. In certain areas of the lake, at that lake in particular, I believe, you can't take a boat, but you can get on canoes or whatever. A lot of people in this area do that. Not something I like, but people do. But he goes out there, and they're in this little paddle boat. They see this hairy-looking thing on the shore. It looked like it was down drinking water, and then it just kind of jumped down into the water. And it started paddling, but it was far away. He said it was like 60 yards or so. At that point, he goes, I could just see this dog-looking head on it. It looked like a wolf or something swimming in the water, but he goes, he would see his arm come up, and it was swimming like a man. It wasn't dog paddling. It wasn't like the limbs run to the water. Him and his girlfriend were getting closer, and they're like, what is that? He said it got across from one shore to the other really quick. He said it was a good 150 yards across probably. It was a pretty good span. He said that in that one area where it was at, it kind of opened back up. He said it was across really quick. And he said as they got closer, they got kind of terrified. What is this thing? Because it doesn't look right. And it was really big. And when it got out of the water, like it started to walk onto the shore, he said it was on 2 legs. And when it got on the other side of the shore, he said as they got closer to it, his girlfriend let out a yell, and he looked at her. He goes, you could have got us killed. He was pretty aggravated. And she's like, I'm sorry. That led to a big old fight on the way home. He said they had a big old fight about it because he said that she was reacting ridiculously because it didn't see them until she made this noise. She let out this yell, which led this creature to look over at them, and see them. When it did, then it started kind of wading back into the water, and they were like, oh my God, this thing's going to swim back out to us. They're paddling for their lives trying to get away from it. So then it just wades back out into the water and starts swimming towards them.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so they're paddling. And they started yelling help, help, because they didn't know what else to do, And he said that they yelled, and there was this echo. And then he said that they heard this howling noise coming from the woods. And this thing stopped. They looked back and it started quickly paddling back toward the shore. It heard something call it. So it went back to the shore, just left them alone, and it got back out. And he said that they just saw it the way he described it, it was it had an ugly scowl on its face, it was aggravating. It was mad that they had seen it. It was kind of a warning, don't come back out this way, stay out of here type warning. So, yeah, that was a pretty crazy story. In Mexican culture, at Christmas time, we always make tamales. His grandmother would always make big batches of tamales, and she would give them away kind of as Christmas presents. So every year we'd go over there, like a couple days before Christmas, and she would give them to the neighborhood people. So I went by there to get some, and you wait all year long for these because some of these people, they can just really cook. So I went over there to get some, and when I went in, there was a couple other people that were up there getting them, whatever. When I went in there to get mine, my friend's dad met me at the door, and he said, "Hey, my dad wants to talk to you," which would have been my friend's grandfather, would have been, his dad's dad. And so I went inside, and I sat down at the table, and I waited for him. And he comes out. At this point, he was already getting on in years. He was a metal worker, and he had a lot of tools in the back of his shed. And I remember when we were kids, we would play around there. And he would always tell us out of the shed, and stay away from there because he had a lot of expensive tools and stuff. And his grandkids had actually messed some stuff up, so he was always telling us to stay out of the backyard or whatever. He had this shed right next to it, and the metal on the shed looked like it had been peeled back, like something or someone had tried to tear it open, It almost looked like somebody had taken a crowbar and messed with it for like a while, but couldn't get in. So I always wondered about that, but I never asked. So when he sat down at the table, he said, "My grandson told me that you had a weird incident down here, right around the corner over here." And he said, "I want to tell you a story." He goes, I want you to listen to what I'm going to tell you. And I want you to know that I believe you. And so this was a year after that. I guess I was like 16. And he told me that back in 1978, he had gone hunting, because in hunting deer season, everybody goes hunting. Everybody has a gun. But he went out and he went hunting, and him and his brother had killed a buck, and they had taken it to that shed, the one next to the shed where his tools and stuff were, and that they had dressed it, whatever, they had skinned it, whatever, and they left it hanging back there, whatever, overnight, and they were going to get back to it the next day and finish cutting it up, whatever, and he said that night he heard banging, clanging metal, like ripping, whatever. He looked out the back window, because his back door, I guess, had a window at that time. It didn't when I was a kid. There was a really thick door there. At that time, there was a window in the door. He said, I used to have a window in the door, and I looked out the window, and I see these two, what I thought were men, tearing open the shed where that deer carcass was. And he thought, at first, these guys are ripping him off, trying to steal his tools. But then he realized that these guys weren't messing with the tool shed. They were messing with the deer shed. He said he opened the door and hollered at him. And, of course, he had a gun with him, a shotgun, a double-barrel shotgun, is what he told me. He goes, I had a double-barrel shotgun, and I opened the door, and I said, you better get away from that shed. He said that when they turned and they looked at him, that they both turned and looked at him simultaneously. He said that these were not men. He said one of them was probably about 6.5 feet tall, the other one was about 7. And he said that they looked at him, and he saw that their heads were like dogs' heads. He said that he goes, it looked like a werewolf, like you would see a werewolf. He said that they were tearing open that shed, and that the smaller one got down on all fours and jumped toward him, and he tried to close the door, and this thing banged up against the door, and right when he did, he unleashed both barrels, and he managed to close the door right after that. He said that he didn't see whether he hit it or not. He just opened fire, and he fell backwards, because when he shot, he said he shot from the hip, and so the recoil, I guess, it knocked him backwards. He said that normally you would have time to raise a gun and shoot, but he didn't have time. This thing jumped across the yard so quick, and then it blew in the window. It broke the glass. He said that he was laying flat on his back, and his wife and his son came into the room, and the kids and everybody woke up, and they were like, what's going on? And he's like, somebody's breaking into the shed. And his wife saw it, too. When she looked out the window, she saw this thing looking right at her in the window. And she was there, too, when we were talking, and she described the way it looked. She said it was just ugly. The way she said it was just very ugly. She said it in Spanish, like feo, And he said that he was afraid that this thing was going to be able to get into the house. And that room, that back room, was their washroom. And I've been in this house several times. And he showed me where it happened. And he said that they closed off that next door, they closed that room off or whatever. I don't know if it got inside or what happened, but he did say that he heard the door handle like shaking, like this thing was trying to manipulate the door handle. That story, that story, it scared me, but it was more confirmation that I knew something that was unique to me, and that these things had been around our town and in our neighborhood for a long time. You know, I began to pay attention and listen, and I talked to several people about things, and there were the old timers, I guess you could say, the older generation. They didn't think it was crazy. They didn't mock me or anything like that. Most of the grief I got was from people my own age, but that was a crazy story. I had a friend of mine, he owns a nightclub, actually two of them here in Austin. His name is R.Ash. Very popular guy, everybody knows him. He used to run a club downtown. I worked with him for years in a club, and now he's got a nightclub here in North Austin. It's pretty popular, it's doing well. But he gave me permission to tell his story and to use his name. He's actually half Persian. His encounter happened out in Lubbock because his dad used to work in the oil fields in Iran. When he came over here after the Ayatollah took over, he went to work in the oil fields and was out there outside of Lubbock. Anywhere from Lubbock down to Midland, that's all oil area. So anyways, they were living in Lubbock at that time before they came here. His mother was from here. He had been playing around their cemetery down the road from his house when he was a kid. He said he was about 11 years old. And it was for Halloween, which is odd because it was like me and him had never talked about this encounter, and then one day we ate dinner, and it just came up. We were talking about stuff going on in my apartment. My brother was telling him. So he opened up to us about this story that he had. I had never told him my encounter, and he had never told me his, so we just started talking. He said, I had a weird incident happen to me near Halloween one time. When he told me that, I was like, whoa. And then I told him, I said that I had an incident that happened to me near Halloween, and it was so strange that we both had this same thing happen. So anyways, he was playing around there at this cemetery. Him and a friend, they were building like a little fort in the woods right there by it. And he started hearing noises like footfall, like something was stalking him, something was coming out of the woods or whatever. And at first they thought it was like a person, like a man or something, but being little kids, they were like, whoa. So they got kind of creeped out, and it was about an hour and a half before dark, according to what my friend told me. He said, it's getting dark, let's get home. So they were freaked out. So they took off walking down this dirt road and cut across this field that goes back to where they live, because his friend lived down the street from him. He said that they kept thinking that something was paralleling them in the woods. They just thought it was a person or something, like a really big person, because it was making a lot of noise, and it was scaring the out of them. So when they got about halfway, they just took off running across the field, and they went back to their houses or whatever. When he got home that night, he kept feeling uneasy, like something was wrong. He goes up to his room, and he's playing with his toys or whatever, messing with his costume for the next day or whatever. He hears this scratching on the glass. He looks up, and he sees this silhouette, because he had this, like, pull-down blinds or whatever, pull-down, I don't know what you call them. They're just like, it's like, just like a pull-down, I don't know what you would call it. I know exactly how he was describing it, but I can't tell you the name of it. But it was like one of those pull-down blinds, whatever. They just pull down and they roll up. So anyways, he said he saw the silhouette of something that looked like a wolf's head. So he got freaked out, so he went to the other window, and he looked, and he saw this thing on the side of his house, like literally a couple feet off the ground, looking in the window. So he closed the blinds on that window, went and screamed and told his mom and dad. His dad looked outside and saw this thing. At this point, had jumped down and was taking off into the direction of the neighbor's yard. Well, about an hour later, after everything calmed down, he went back to his room to go to sleep, and he started hearing the noise again. Then he saw the silhouette move. So he walked over to the window where he thought it was at. He's like, it's got to be this thing that I saw earlier, you know? And so he took up his courage, and he went over to the window, and he peeked out of it, and he saw it standing right there staring at him in the window. He said he just looked, and then he let go of the blinds and backed up, and they rolled up. So the thing was just staring right at him, and it was licking the glass. Like it had its face pressed against the glass, and it was licking it with its tongue out. Like it was tasting it or something. He said he'll never forget. It had like these really ugly, like yellowy looking eyes. And he said that it had these really pointy ears that looked almost like a German Shepherd or, you know, whatever. This really pointy ears on top of its head. So he ran back out, and his dad got his gun, and he went back outside, and it disappeared. They don't know where it went. That was his encounter.
Abe Sias, episode 53.
My AC unit had given out. I had a window fan giving me air, and I heard a woman yelling for help. I shut off the fan, and I heard the woman still yelling for help, so I came outside, and I was hearing the voice of a woman yelling for help, so I went back inside the house, grabbed a bat, and I came out, and I started following the voice, the cry for help. Went through the park. As I cut through the park, I could hear that the voice was coming from the Woodline itself. So I'm out there listening to this cry of help. So I grabbed my bat that I had in hand, and I went into the darkness of the Woodline, following the cry for help. When I walked through the path that was there, and I went around the bend, I could hear the voice getting closer and closer. So I kept on being cautious with my bat in my hand, ready to swing to see if I've seen somebody doing something to this woman. But when I got to a certain location in that Woodline, the cry for help stopped. When the cry for help stopped, it felt weird to me because it was around 2:30 or 3 in the morning. And I'm thinking, at that point in time, what am I doing out here if there's no woman to help? When I turned around, that's when I seen them. I seen 6 of them, 3 on one side of the path and 3 on the other. They were pretty tall. I would say between 8 to 9 foot tall. I could see their eyes glowing, looking at me. At that point in time, the only thing I could do is not be afraid because I don't know what kind of animal or creature I was dealing with. So I started praying within myself and tried to stay as calm as possible. As I started walking forward and praying within myself, I could see these creatures looking at me, and they were following me with their heads. I was short compared to them, and I'm 5'11". I kept on walking, and I kept on praying, and I came around the bend, and as soon as I came out of the Woodline, I started walking a little bit faster. When I got halfway through the park, I took up running back home. I was in shock when I got back home, and I had to take a shower just to realize what just happened in the Woodline. At that point in time, my son was 5 years old, and I gave him a big hug because I believe I was in a predicament that I shouldn't be here right now.
Lisa, episode 72.
The house that I was living in, our backyard led up to a patch of woods that had a path. It had a walking path. But this walking path led into another family's yard, and they had a playhouse. And so when I was younger, about 5, I would get into mischief, and I would go back into the woods, and I would go into the playhouse because it was fully stocked. There were toys, and there was a little table to sit at, and so I used to go back there, and every once in a while, I would start to have this feeling come over me. I couldn't explain. Maybe the feeling of being watched, but I would just all of a sudden become afraid for no apparent reason, and I would just leave. And then days would pass, and I would go back. There was one time when I brought my older sister with me, and we were sitting at the little picnic table in the playhouse, and the same thing basically happened to her. She started to feel really kind of creeped out, and she said, I don't like you here. I want to go back home. And so we left and went back home. Well, one afternoon, I went to go play in the playhouse, and the people that lived on this property came home. And so I basically felt kind of trapped, and I had a really good view of the backside of their house where the sliding glass doors were, and I could see the lady in her living room, and she kept looking over at the playhouse, so she probably knew that I was there and didn't have a problem with it because she didn't say anything to me, but I was feeling like I was caught. While I was sitting there, I had that strange feeling come over me that I was being watched. And to the right of this playhouse was a birch tree that had a V in it. I looked over at the birch tree and could see this one black eye of something looking through the V at me, and I ran out of the house, and don't know how many days passed, but one afternoon, and I'm going to guess it was probably late summer, maybe early fall, I got it in my head to go back there to go play. And as I was leaving my back door and in my yard, something cut me off. I looked up to see this individual covered in light brown hair, just inches from me, looking down at me, and I got a really good look at its face. And it had large black eyes. It had a nose that appeared more pug comes to mind. Like, you know, it was muzzle-like, but it just looked kind of smushed in like a pug's would. It had pointed ears on the side of its head. It didn't make a noise. It was just looking down at me, and at that time I didn't feel afraid. But something had caught its attention to, I believe, its left, and it turned its head, and I looked past it to see another individual with it, only this one was tall, lanky, and it was red-haired, which is an interesting coincidence because the Bennington Monster was said to be red-haired. But this individual looked more, for lack of a better term, more like an orangutan. That's really the only way I can describe it. Hunched over shoulders. I could see the eyes blinking, but it was so tall that it was standing in the boughs of a maple tree that was hanging over my parents' garden. So the rest of his face was kind of hidden in shadow, so I couldn't make out any details. But it turned around and it started to rip out the plants that were in the garden, and that was when I ran back into my house and shut the door, and I remember the feelings of fear kicking in. I was afraid that these things were going to come into my house and hurt my parents, and went into the living room where both of my parents were, and I said, there are monsters in the garden, and they are ripping out plants. My father was not very kind about it. He was just kind of like, yeah, sure, stop lying, don't make things up like that. And my mother said nothing, but went into the kitchen and looked out the back door, and she said, there's nothing out there. And she called me over to look, and sure enough, nothing was out there. Either that day or the next day, my parents were out in the garden, and I was in the house, and they called me out. It was destroyed. There were plants ripped up and thrown everywhere. There were large footprints. They left the tomatoes intact, interestingly enough. And my mother asked me to tell her what happened again. And so I related the story. And my parents were puzzled, definitely disturbed. My father at the time was a high school teacher, and so he thought maybe some of the kids from the local high school had come and played a prank on him. And my mother kept saying, if that's true, how can you explain these footprints? I think it must have rained or something, but the ground was really muddy, so it's not like I could make out any details of footprints, but it just was an absolute mess. So I think I stayed out there and helped them clean up a little bit. And I have kind of missing fragments of a time frame, but sometime after those events, my parents had a friend come to the house, and he brought his little girl who was about my age. We were playing in the house for a little while, and she was really shy, and I was doing my best to be friendly, and so I thought it would be a good idea to show her the playhouse because it was, you know, a great secret of mine. And so we went to the playhouse, started playing, having a good time. I think I remember she had heard something first and kind of looked afraid. I was facing out towards the little doorway and the cutout window, and I saw first the red individual walk by and go about its business, and then the second creature, the light brown in color creature, started looking. It was kind of creeping around the house, looking in the window. And it looked at the little girl that was with me first, and she started crying. And then I made direct eye contact with this thing. It had very, very large, or appeared to be really large, black eyes. And there was almost this sense of recognition. That's the only way I can describe it, almost like, oh, there you are. And I dove underneath the table, and both of us are crying and shaking and screaming, and this thing pretty much stuck its feet and its legs and the bottom of its torso in the doorway, and I think it kind of had its arms folded on top of the little roof, and it was peeking down at us, and it was showing its teeth, and it was making these growling noises that sounded almost nasal-like, but I don't think it was meant to be like overly aggressive. I almost think that it was playing with us, like it was having a good time knowing that it had trapped us in the house. And so the little girl said she told me that she just wet herself. And if anybody remembers childhood really well, that's one of the most humiliating things you can go through. And so I was close enough to this thing's feet that I could only really see the tops of it. And they were arched, but I didn't know what else to do. And I started pounding on its feet and screaming at it to go away. It did. It moved away. I don't know where it took off to. I heard, no, I don't remember any sounds, nothing. I just remember grabbing this little girl's hand, and both of us ran down the path together. And her father was standing out in the backyard calling for her. And when we reached him, he instantly knew something was wrong. And she was still pretty shooken up, and I had just so she got scared and she had an accident. And so he took her home. I don't know how much time passed, but I do remember going back out into the woods, and I started talking and saying, "I'm sorry, I hit you." But I think I was doing that more because I was scared this thing would come after me. But all of a sudden, it was there. And I remember sitting down, and it kind of mimicked me, and it was sitting down too, and we were facing each other. And it was definitely checking me out, and I was telling it, "I'm sorry I hit you, but you scared my friend." And it reached out with its hand, and it patted me on the head, and then it laid down on the ground in the leaf litter, and it pulled me to its side and basically held me to its side, like pinning me, and was just kind of laying there for a second. I remember it sort of moving its feet in the leaf litter and making noise, and then it instantly let me go, and it kind of flipped itself over on all fours in like a protective stance. And the only thing that comes to my mind is like something you'd see a gorilla do. And this very low, menacing growl was just emanating from its chest. It was looking past me, and then I heard my older sister calling for me. And I got up. I think I even said something along the lines of, "Hey, that's my sister," and started running towards her to grab her so that she could come see what I was seeing. She had gotten yelled at, I believe, by my father, and she had said, I think I said, "I want you to come see my friend." I think I called it my friend. And she said, "Never mind that. Dad's really upset. He's demanding that you come home right now. He never wants you to go in these woods again." She just was ranting. We went into the house, and I know that it was around supper time. We were sitting at the table, and he said, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened." I did not feel at all that he would believe me, because he didn't believe me before when I said that there are monsters in the garden. And I said, "I took such and such, I don't remember her name, to the playhouse. She got scared, and she had an accident." And my dad just sat there for a couple minutes at least, just watching me, just thinking. And then he finally said, "Okay, well, I just got a call from whoever the man's name was." He said that she was so upset that he had to take her to the hospital, and that she told him everything. And then he said, "You are not allowed to go back there." He basically said forbid, and I remember he had to explain what forbid was. He said, "I absolutely forbid you to go into those woods ever again. Do not go back there." In light of what happened, I completely agreed with him and never made it back into those woods. Definitely took to playing in the front yard. In fact, I think I spent most of my time on the front porch until we did move.
Jay Tucker, episode 76.
I think the date was December the 10th. I'm real bad with dates and names. But the reason why I can remember that and everything's so fresh is we have a family Christmas. We have a very large family, my side of the family. And I hadn't been to our family function in about 6 years because of what I used to do. And like I said, we lived out of state and never was convenient. So this family function had came up and we went to it. I live in the north part of Mississippi, and it was in the central part of Mississippi, 2 hours away from us. And the way you have to get to this is take 45 down to the Natchez Trace, and then from the Natchez Trace, you get on it in Tupelo, Mississippi on mile marker 250 and go south on the Natchez Trace, and you get off at mile marker 205 and get onto a little road called 82. And you go from 82 to Winona, Mississippi. That's where I'm originally from, which is Montgomery County. We went down there for our family Christmas and didn't plan on staying or nothing, and stayed there till about, I'm going to say it was already dark. It was probably 7:38 because after we left, like I said, it was already dark. The kids were tired. My wife was in the passenger side, and we were talking about how nice everything was. Well, we got down 82 highway and got to the turn on to Natchez Trace, and was going down the Natchez Trace. Now, at night, especially, it was between 8:30 and 9:30, I'm going to say, roughly in between there. There's not a whole lot of traffic on this road. Like I said, it is a road in the middle of nowhere. You can Google the Natchez Trace and you'll see how desolated it is. It's actually a bicycle trail that they allow cars to use. And like I said, there's no other vehicles on the road. We got on it, like I said, at mile marker 205. And it's like they come in and it's a bunch of deadfalls, stuff like that they've took out on both sides of the road. So it's pretty open through there. The first part of it, first probably 8 miles from 205 going back north. We come up on this little bridge and off to the driver's side of the road, which is the left side of the road going north, I see this animal. And at first, we're probably 200 yards back from the animal. I think it's just a coyote at first because of how it's standing and how far we are away from it. And I told my wife, I said, look, I said, coyote. Because we were looking for deer because deer are bad on this road. Now, the speed limit is only 50 miles an hour on this road. I was actually, because I knew there were no law enforcement after 6 o'clock, there's no law enforcement and it's only rangers on that road. I was doing faster than what I was supposed to be going, and thank God I was. Like I said, we were 200 yards back, first seen the animal. It was probably 75 yards from the edge of the road to the Woodline. As we approach it, it's almost at the Woodline. It's probably 4 feet. All I had to do was take 2 steps. It's in the woods. It's safe. It's away from us. Instead, it turns completely around, sees us, and starts charging to the road, to the car. And I look at my wife and said, I don't know, what is that? That's not a coyote. My wife starts screaming, it's going to hit us. It's going to hit us. She curls up into a ball on the passenger side and just holding on. We're in a 2001 Kia Sportage. It's a small car, but it's high up off the ground. It's not a short car. As we get to the animal, I'm talking about, I had it on cruise control and I've still got my foot. I'm mashing now because my whole thought is I've got to get my family away from this thing. It's trying to attack us. Now, I have weapons in the car. I always have weapons on me. I had a 45, 9mm, and I have a 308 high-powered rifle in the back of the car because it's deer season now. I knew, as big as this animal was, nothing I had was, it was no reason to stay and fight. I wanted to get out of there. So, like I said, I push on the gas. As we kind of meet, we're about 10 feet apart as my driver's side window comes lined up with this creature, animal, whatever you want to call it. As it's running, it's not on all fours, but it kind of hunched over and looking like it is. I said, I'm 10 feet away from this thing. I got a good look at it. I looked directly into its eyes. It looked into mine. Its mouth was kind of open. It had like an animal fixing to grab prey, like a dog, cat, whatever. Right before it gets ready to grab, its mouth comes open. That's the way its mouth was. Its eyes were a yellowish amber color. Easiest way I can describe it. Now, they're not lighting up or nothing like that. Just a illumination from my headlights is what caught that. But like I said, they're yellow looking, amberish. There's no more light illuminating this animal because my headlights, when I passed it, it's beside me, about 10 feet. I'm looking straight at it. This thing had an overly large wolf-shaped head, but its ears, the way this ears, they look like big spades on top of its head. I'm talking about, and they're a lighter color on the inside. The animal was a dark gray black to a light gray on its side. You're probably talking, if I had to estimate, probably 400 plus pounds. This animal was. You could see every rippling. It looked like a pro wrestler on steroids. Like I said, it was. You could just see the muscle mass as it's running. The muzzle wasn't real long, but it was stuck out probably 5 or 6 inches. It looked like you could tell the muscular in its face, and the hair wasn't real shaggy. It was probably 4 or 5 inches long, but you could see it flowing. It wasn't, real long and droopy. And like I said, as we passed right there, I'm thinking, I'm getting ready. It's fixing to hit my door, is what I think. And like I said, just so happened I had been going faster than what I was supposed to be. And if I had to been, it would have centered my driver's side door. It passed right behind the vehicle. My tail lights, without no brake lights being matched, just the tail lights. As I'm looking in my side mirror, I can see it light the hair up on the animal as it goes past. I did not turn to see if the animal tried to follow us. My whole thing was, my wife is screaming. I'm trying to get as far away from this creature as I can, because if it would have hit us, it was big enough, it would have rolled us and probably took me out, and then my family would have been left to survive on their own. And I believe that's what it was trying to do. I believe it was trying to roll our vehicle because it was running, looked like as hard as it could. And like I said, I kept telling my wife, it's okay. She kept screaming. What was that? That was no coyote. That I've never seen nothing like it. She goes, it was as big as a cow. What was that? I said, there's no mistaking this animal for being anything other than what it is. It's an unknown cryptid wolf. Bipedal. I said, I don't know. That's why, like, when I contacted you, I told you I didn't know if I'd seen a werewolf, wolf, wendigo, whatever you want to call it, but I've never seen one before, and I hope I never see one again. That would be a blessing, because this animal was not, there was no reason for it to do what it done. It purposely turned to attack us. And there was no other cars on that road. We didn't meet another car probably for 40 miles. If it would have rolled us, like I said, it would have killed us. I have no doubt about that. That's my story.
I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. That was the last encounter. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and have a great new year. If you've had a Dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.